Welcome to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media, featuring the top builders, projects, and investors pioneering Bitcoin inscription protocols and the future of digital artifacts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Ordinals Podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar Lifthrasir. Today, we have a great show. Going to be talking about the tip of the spear of Ordinals, which is inscriptions, inscription services. That's where everything happens. So we're lucky to be joined by Brian Laughlan, also known as Bruffstar. Brian, welcome to the Ordinals Podcast.
Hey, Ragnar, it's good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So you have interesting experience because you've done, I think, a successful, very interesting NFT collection. And then now you're the co-founder of Ordinals Bot, which is obviously a very popular inscription service. So I feel like you can talk about various different things, different blockchains, different services. What was it like when Ordinals hit? What do you do now? So we're just kind of going to go down that list. And let's start off with your experience with NFTs first, so we understand how you see Ordinals. So tell everyone, what is Satoshables? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's my baby. It's my pet project, I started that in 2021, actually. So just before the whole NFT boom happened, I was knee-deep in DeFi projects. So we were coming at the end of the DeFi summer in the end of 2020. And, I had my fair share of rug pulls then on multiple different chains, just tying my hand at everything. And then towards the end of that year of 2020, basically, I started hearing NFTs just being everywhere, and everyone's talking about these NFTs. And I knew about them, obviously, from CryptoPunks back in the day, and then obviously all the counterparty stuff. And then more recently at the time on Ethereum was the Crypto Kitties made a big splash for a moment. So I knew about them. I just didn't really understand if they were going to go mainstream or anything. But then at the end of 2020, everyone started talking about them. So I thought, you know what, let's just try something. I've got a technical background. I'm sure I can launch something, but I'm not an artist. So I went on the hunt, tried to find an artist, and I was really fortunate to find our artist who's still with the project, Ayub. He's a young guy from Morocco, and his artwork is very retro comic book style. So it was like really what I had in my mind, because I was brewing this concept of like, wouldn't it be cool to make a kind of collection based on like the crypto godfather himself, Satoshi, and the whole lore around the fact that nobody actually knows who he or she actually is. So I was really captivated with that since the beginning of my crypto journey. I was like, this is an amazing concept. And then everything that Bitcoin's done for the industry, I just really was captivated by it. And this collection essentially was trying to capture that essence and build a little community around that and of like-minded people. So me and I have got to work at the end of 2020, basically, and then we launched it in June 2021, just at the perfect time of the NFT bull run on Ethereum. And we sold out that weekend, minted all 5,000 of them. Craziest weekend of my life, basically. And then since then, a community was born overnight, and I've been with that community ever since, building it, doing some cool things here and there, pumping out more artwork, building some nice technology, and it's really enjoying the time. And then more recently, as we can just talk about later, as the Ordinals thing just came in like a tidal wave and really kind of energized everything in the space. So yeah, that's the kind of brief intro of Satoshables, and it's still around today. We're still kicking hard, So
Well, there's some very notable things about Satoshables. So for me personally, Satoshables was the first NFT project that I even cared about or even paid attention to, because I come from Bitcoin from 2011, never got into Ethereum or really any other chain besides Monero. And I always thought NFTs were just kind of silly at best. But when I saw Satoshables, I'm like, wait a minute, Satoshi? Now that's something I could get behind. But yet you still had to do it on Ethereum, right, of all things, because Bitcoin just wasn't there. So here you were trying to give a shout out to Satoshi. You're enthusiastic about Bitcoin. You want to do something there. I think there's a lot of value, and I do love the artwork. So I don't like a lot of artwork in NFTs, but I really like what you guys did there. So here you are doing it on Ethereum, and then there's a connection with Stacks, and then lo and behold, Ordinals hit. So you have the NFT background, you have the technical background. So when did you first hear about Ordinals? What was your very, very, very first thing you ever did relating to Ordinals?
Yeah, I think the journey actually begins with Ethereum and then goes to Stacks in the middle. So it's fair to maybe give that a mention as well. So basically, my intro to Stacks was essentially through Trevor Owens. who is well known in the Stacks ecosystem, of course, and now in the Ordinal space. And he actually minted 50 Satoshibles on Ethereum, which was huge. It was huge at the time. It came in as an order of 50. I'm like, oh, who's that guy? And he slid into my DMs and said, these are really cool. I just minted 50 of them. And I'm like, wow. And then he basically said, I hated that I had to do it on Ethereum, though. They should be on Bitcoin. And I'm like, well, Bitcoin NFTs aren't really a thing. You can't really launch them right now unless it's on Counterparty and stuff. He's like, well, have you heard of Stacks, basically? And then I fell in love with it, went down the rabbit hole and basically just said, right, listen, these are, it's the Bitcoin layer 2, essentially. They're building on Bitcoin, and they've got NFT collections already there. Let's say to my community, let's just go and try and make an impact there. Let's see if we can go there and become one of the top projects there, And my community got really behind it. And then I had to answer the question of, how do I do that now? How do I bridge a community and a collection that's already minted on Ethereum? How do I get that onto Stacks, And I went through the process of like, well, maybe we just launch another 5,000 on Stacks. And then it's like, then you're really diluting the supply. And there's 10,000 of them now. I really liked that 5,000 number that we had. So I didn't want to do that. And then I thought, what about a bridge, right? An NFT bridge. And I thought, I'll just go Google and find one. There must be one already. And this is obviously not between Ethereum and Stacks, right? So I went down the road of like building one. So we created stacksbridge.com. And essentially it's a semi-trusted bridge, essentially, with automated central component, which will essentially, you can transfer your Satoshable from Ethereum, and then essentially gets locked in the bridge on the Ethereum side, and then we'll unlock its exact ID match on the other side with no burning mechanism. There's an equal amount of Satoshibles on Stacks that there is on Ethereum with the same IDs, and just either way they get locked up on either chain. There's only one active at a time. And we launched this, I think it was January 2022 we launched it. And then since then, we had around 30% of the collection actually bridge over. But not just that, a lot of my community, basically, they also then doubled down on Stacks and really got involved buying other collections, launching collections of their own, building other tools and stuff, all in Stacks. So I really did bridge a community over from Ethereum and opened that gate. And that was a captivating thing for me. And I thought maybe we can do that more. And we explored that opportunity to maybe try and get more projects over. And some did and stuff. But so we were all in. And
sorry? No, I'm glad you paused me and talked about Stacks, because the reason why I say that is because you are another Stacks person who came into Ordinals. You're a Bitcoin fanatic, right? You were in Ethereum, but Stacks, and you're one of those Stacks builders who was really sort of ready, I would say, when Ordinals hit, maybe than perhaps other people.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing that maybe most people don't get, is that all of the Stacks community essentially are huge Bitcoin advocates. Like, we want Bitcoin to succeed. That's the whole point of building Stacks, is to make Bitcoin succeed. And the end goal was also of Stacks has always been to melt it away and then just have one-to-one Bitcoin transactions, and maybe through SBTC and things like that. So that's always been the goal. It's just that when February this year hit, it all went into turbo superdrive, because now Ordinals comes along and it has this great resonance with everybody and a great traction. And it's like, okay, what do we do? Do we just like fight this, or do we actually go behind it? And luckily the whole Stacks community really got behind it. And then you've seen the likes of Xverse and Hero come into the space, dominate the wallet space, and a bunch of other collections coming over. So it's been a great thing for Stacks, but I think overall it's obviously been a great thing for Bitcoin in general. But it's also highlighted maybe also the need for layer 2s or meta protocols being built on top of Bitcoin. And I'm pretty sure that will be there'll be a future for that coming quite soon, in terms of when people really want to start building, there's only so much you can do on layer 1, and then there'll be a great topic around L2.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. It's a really interesting question to see where the Ordinal space would be without a lot of that Stacks community and Stacks builders.
Yeah, it's great. And so when you first, when and how did you first hear about Ordinals? Because you're a Bitcoin guy, you're an NFT guy. When did you first hear about Ordinals? And then what was the first thing you either did or inscribed?
Yeah, so I think it was around about mid-January. So I had just come back from my Christmas vacation, and I was browsing around, and I think it was on Twitter somewhere. I think it was Leonidas mentioned Ordinals, and I looked at it. It's interesting, Bitcoin NFTs essentially. I thought Stacks was doing that, right? So I looked into it. I'm obviously concerned, and what is this? But then it really just like, I don't know what happened, but light bulb moment happened. I thought, this is actually huge. This is unbelievably huge. It's actually data on Bitcoin. You know, when you look beyond the NFTs and the JPEGs, it's actually a decentralized data layer on Bitcoin. It's got to solve the same problem on a level of what Bitcoin can do for payments. It's got to solve the same level for data as well. So I kind of seen that instantly and I thought, this is amazing. And then I dived in, like, how do I do it? You know, how do I make these things? Is it a smart contract? What happens, you know? And then read the Ordinals handbook and I thought, okay, it's a theory on top of it. It's not changing Bitcoin in any way. That's cool. Right, I understand that, but how do you set it up? And then I realized it's actually a little bit of a technical hurdle to do so. You need to run your own Bitcoin node. And you need to also then run the Ordinal client as well, which is like, you know, doable, but it's like a 25-step tutorial and try to set up Sparrow wallet and everything. And me being like, you know, a dumb front-end developer, I could just about manage it, but like most retail users won't want to go and learn how to do that. So that's when I had the idea of like maybe a service that does this for people would be great. And then, you know, reached out to a couple of people, and then basically we started working on it that weekend. And then this was just at the beginning of February. And then, yeah, Ordinals Bot was born that weekend and we launched it basically. But the first thing I ever inscribed was my PFP, the Satoshiables number 27. I inscribed it at like, I think it was 1,116. So like really early, considering now there's over 17 million inscriptions. That was like super early. So that was really interesting. Yeah, and then we were one of the first ones to launch a service that basically automated that process. You drag and drop a file, we'll inscribe it to the wallet that you give us. So no technical setup, literally just drag and drop.
Yeah, I love Ordinals Bot. I used it when you guys launched pretty early. I'm like, oh, this is what I needed, right? Because I'm not technical. I mean, I've run Bitcoin nodes since, you know, the beginning, but then the Ordinals, and it's like, okay. And I'm familiar with Sparrow, of course, love Sparrow. But it was just kind of a heavy lift for me. So I love seeing Ordinals Bot and, of course, some other services, but I love Ordinals Bot. So you guys moved really fast. Now I'm wondering why you didn't do like a new collection, come up with a Satoshiables 2.0 or something else. Instead, you kind of went a different route, these service. So why did you do that instead of coming up with a cool collection instead?
Yeah, so obviously I'm running two tracks here, right? I've got Satoshiables project, and then I'm obviously co-founder of Ordinals Bot. So I'm actually doing both at the same time. And Satoshiables kind of hasn't found its real use case yet. You know, we're a great community and it's amazing art, and we've built some cool stuff. But like, we've not really found that absolute thing that's got to drive us to the next level. And I've got a couple of co-founders that I've brought in now on that project. We're really working through it, and we've got some really cool things in the pipeline. And at the same time, you know, the question was raised of like, what is the Ordinals presence going to be like for Satoshiables? Mm-hmm. And then my first instinct was like, can we try and build another bridge and somehow have a tri-way bridge? And it was like, well, that sounds like a headache. I'll probably never sleep again if I make that, you know. So for the short term, just to get something out there, we had the idea of just doing a 100 limited collection, basically. And then we got Ayub to dust off the old tablet, and we recreated a bunch of new traits, Ordinals tracksuit and Satoshiables hat. And I actually had this idea of zooming out as well. So you've seen more of the body on this collection, which meant he had to redraw all of the body traits as well. So they're all redesigned, and it's really interesting seeing just the difference between his artwork from just a year, you know, or a year and a half. Like, it's so much more detailed now. It's amazing. So anyway, we created these new traits, and I generated 100 of them. And then we gave 50 away to the current holders, and various methods, did raffles and things. And then we actually launched the other 50 via Magic Eden. So we sold the rest on Magic Eden, essentially. I think we were the second project to launch on Magic Eden, basically, through their launchpad. So we have got a presence from Satoshiables on Ordinals, and then we're really trying to figure out the question of like, how do you get the original collection, make that connection there, you know? So we're really working through that. And then, yeah, with Ordinals Bot, we had the service going, and then it's just been a whirlwind ever since, because this is a business that was just ready to go day one, right? We had like thousands of users on day one, essentially, like dying for this product. So we were really fortunate to have a startup project which just had already demand there. So much so, actually, on the first day or the second day, melted. The server completely melted.
That's a good sign.
It was the Bitcoin punks mint. So at the time, if you looked at their Discord, people were actually saying, "I'll inscribe something for you. All you need to do is send me $1,000." OTC, like trustful is like, it was a mess, which also filled the gap of like, there's definitely an automated service that has to happen here. Like that's not the direction we want to go in here. Is these trustful trades over Discord. So as soon as that kind of broke out and their Discord, hey, there's a drag and drop service that does this. We got bombarded with those guys just trying to be the first one to inscribe those things. And I think in the end, we inscribed about 80% of that collection. So that was a great start out of the gate, right? We had a brilliant, successful launch. And then since then, it's just been constantly just trying to keep up with the movement, because it's a, as we can allude to later, like there's just non-stop things happening every single week in the ordinal space. New meta protocols, new ideas, new concepts. People are just like throwing stuff to the wall and seeing what sticks. And us as a service provider is just trying to react and, keep the tool evolving to match these match this demand,
Yeah, I did notice you guys moved really fast, which I appreciate. And the user experience has been great for me. I think you guys have just struck the right balance of doing things. I wanted to ask you, you said that people are kind of throwing things out the wall and seeing what sticks. And that's good and bad, right? It's good to see experimentation. It's good to let the market decide. But then some of the things thrown against the wall, maybe they're not very good. So I wanted to ask you, how do you guys decide what you're going to support? Because that means like man hours, it means risks, but then you want to give users what they want. Like you guys have .sats, BRC20. So what do you guys look at when you see, oh, here's this new thing? What's your guys' thought process? What are your qualifications to do something new?
It's a great question, and I think that we want this to happen. I think we wouldn't be here right now unless people really experimented and tried. So we want as much experimentation as possible. If it doesn't work, that's fine. But we, as a service provider, do need to take the decision to say, like, how far do we go with that? It's almost impossible with a small team like ours to keep up and just to do everything, essentially. It also like blows up the UI, makes it really difficult. So at the beginning, .sats was the first one to kick off this whole JSON meta protocol concept. And we thought that's cool. So we integrated the UI for that. And then BRC20 came, and then it all just went on fire after that. And we made the decision to say, listen, we can't keep up with this. So what we've shifted focus to actually is to make it more generic for people and give them the building blocks. And then we doubled down on our API essentially. And we're aiming actually now to become more of an API infrastructure company rather than a web app. Of course, we're going to have the web app using our API, but we're really doubling down on the API side and giving people essentially the building blocks to go and then just plug and play. If they want to test something, they can build their own UI. They plug in our backend, and then even I'm working on an SDK right now, so that literally they can use the components on the front end as well. They can just drag and drop things, the minting, the fee selection, the file upload, all that stuff. Make an SDK and give them the building blocks so that we can make it easy for people. So we're not reacting, but we're just giving them the tools to go and do it, and then we can then see really what works, and then maybe we integrate it to that way. When something becomes as huge as BRC20 came, right, we can then double down on that rather than just like reacting all the time and updating and complicating our UI as well, right? We've only got so much space.
That makes sense.
So that's what we've been working on, and yeah, it's worked out great. Since then we've got Xverse and Hero are both using our API. Emblem Vault's using an API for the inscription side of things. We're working together with Magic Eden as well for some API stuff and some Launchpad stuff. So that's really the direction that we're seeing ourselves going, and it's one I'm kind of excited about as well, because it opens up a lot more doors. When you give people the tools, they'll build stuff you could never even dream of and think of, and it's like, that's an amazing idea, So we've already seen some people working on some stuff, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up your API, because I wanted to ask you about that, because like at Trajan, we're have our Ordinals strategy that we haven't launched yet. We're working on it, and definitely we're like, oh, do we have to build our own service? And we're like, wait a minute, Ordinals Bot has our API. This is interesting. This would really make our lives easier. And you guys do, I think, have a good track record. So what specifically can your API do right now?
Yeah, I think what stands us apart from everybody else right now is essentially our inscription API, right? So we have, since day one, automated the whole process. And because it's all automated, our API is just plugged into that back-end system, essentially. So we have the order endpoint where you can send it a request which has the files in it, and the fee rate, like what fee you want to spend on that, basically, and a couple of other options. And then once we receive that, we'll send you back an order number and then a payment details. And those payment details include actually the Lightning invoice as well, or a payment address where you send the payment to. And then that's it. That's what you get. It's raw. You can do what you want with it, essentially. You can then build your own UI with your own payment flow. And then once it's paid, no matter how it's paid, basically, our automation kicks in. We just wait for it to be paid. And once it's paid, we take the file, we inscribe it, and we send it, basically. So by having that flexibility on API, basically, and not really forcing people down any road, you just send us the files and we'll inscribe it for you. That kind of makes it as flexible as possible for people just to do, whatever they want with their API, essentially.
Yeah, that's great. So I encourage developers to check out the API. Like, again, we're looking at it for some one or two things that we're doing. I think it's very important to kind of decentralize things a little bit, to just open it to new people. I mean, good old APIs, right? I mean,
yeah,
they power.
And any new features we're bringing out, we're doing an API first kind of a strategy where, for example, the rare stats feature that we just launched a month ago, we did it on API first, and then I integrated it into the web app, right? So even the rare stats feature is now really integrated into the API. It's actually just as easy as when you send an order, you just specify rare stats uncommon, and we'll do the rest. We'll take an uncommon from our inventory, and then we'll essentially inscribe that file onto an uncommon stat for you. And then the order you get back, obviously the payment will include the fee for that and the payment. So.
I saw that. That was a great feature. Another one that you guys have that I like is, what's the exact title, but it's where the image checker, where you guys will take a file, hash it, and then check it. I thought that was interesting. Can you explain to people what that is and why they would want to use it?
Yeah, but we call it the hash check. We have our own index running, of course, and we actually hash every single file, and we keep a store of that hash, which means that you can do essentially a really quick search for any file, and then if we can find, we will then search basically the actual byte perfect version of that file and tell you if that's been inscribed or not before. And the reason that's useful is because I mentioned the Bitcoin Punks mint, one of the very first collections that minted on Ordinals was the Bitcoin Punks mint. And this is a so-called byte perfect mint, meaning that they want to take the exact image that's on Ethereum, the exact one, and put it on Ordinals. And that way, because it's the exact byte perfect image, you can do a reverse lookup on all the inscriptions, and you can basically find what one was first. So who was the first one to inscribe this byte perfect punk, meaning they get it. It's the whole first is first principle that a lot of the ordinal space follows, right? The BRC20s, first is first, etc. And the byte perfect mint follows the same concept. So the first person to inscribe this byte perfect image is the winner, essentially the owner. And there was a need for it, basically, for these mints. So with the hash checker, you can upload any file, basically, and we'll just run through our index and we'll tell you, yep, it's never been inscribed before. You can click and you can go ahead and inscribe it, or yep, it's inscribed, here it is, basically. That's all that does.
Yeah, I love, I love hashing things. It's like a weird thing that I like to do, and checking it and verifying it. And maybe another time we can talk about something that Hank came up with, was being able to, on Stacks, take a file, sign it, and then turn it into an inscription. And then you can go back and verify the digital signature. So that's another conversation, but that's just one cool thing that you can do. So I'm glad you guys have that.
I have a little anecdote as well. Like, basically, I think it was 2011, so really early. I didn't know anything about Bitcoin or crypto or anything. And I had this idea though, like, oh, that's quite cool. You can hash any file. That's awesome. And then you can use that as a verification. Like, you could use that as verifying this as a file. And like, oh, you can actually put that in a timestamp as well. And then you can use that as a verification of ownership. And I had this great idea called Secure Stamp and everything. And I got my friend involved. He's here in Switzerland. And like, oh, I know, I've got a server in a Swiss mountain somewhere. We can use that as security. So we had this great thing. And then we have a friend, Dave, from Mexico. And we're like, he's a really smart guy. He was mining Bitcoin at the time, unbeknownst to me. But I was like, Dave, what do you think about this idea? And he's just like, that's Bitcoin. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, it's all based on hashes and everything. I said, I don't know what that is. And it went in one ear and out the other, basically in 2011. So I could have been a really early adopter if I just listened and paid that little bit more attention to Dave.
Yeah, well, Bitcoin is the time chain, right? It's a time chain. I remember one of the first. I can't remember what it was called, but at the time, 2011 or 2012, someone actually kind of did that, where you could upload a file, right, and it would hash it, and it would insert it in some way. I can't remember how. It was a guy from, I think, Argentina, and it was just that. So yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is the time chain. It's the time stamping service. There's hashing involved, so it combines your loves, right? Hashing and art.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so that's a great service that you have. So going back to Ordinals Bot for a second. So what advice can you give for kind of the first time person? They're going to do their first inscription. They're going to use Ordinals Bot. What's something that they should look out for? What should they kind of get lined up so there's no issues as much as they can? And explain kind of, any advice?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, first of all, it's quite expensive, right? It's not as cheap as other chains. Bitcoin blockchain putting data on there is a premium real estate. There's only 150 blocks a day, and there's a 4 megabyte limit, so it's very limited in terms of what stuff you can put on there, and that makes it a little bit more expensive for the average person. So if you're looking to back up some files, or you want to do something to memorialize it on Bitcoin, I would definitely like to experiment and upload some stuff, and then I would really recommend that you optimize it first. There's some great image optimization services out there. Tiny Panda, I think it's called, is one, and then there's Kraken.io is another one. And you can actually take a file literally 90% down in file size without losing any visual difference. Side by side, it looks identical. But what you've done there is you've just saved yourself 90% of the fees that you would cost to put this on chain. So I would definitely recommend that if you've got the opportunity to do it, optimize the files the best you can before you inscribe anything, first of all. And through Ordinals Bot, actually, we have that service built in. So by default, it's checked. So any images you upload with us, we'll run it through the optimizer automatically. But you can also turn that off if you want to do it yourself, just to have that level of control over the quality and make sure it's not over-optimizing it. But yeah, that would be my big takeaway, is that basically there's no point in spending that fee when you can optimize the file and you don't have any difference in quality. I think that's the number one thing, is basically optimizing the files.
Yeah, that's the first thing that hit me, especially when the fees jumped. I thought, do I really want to inscribe this? Is it really worth it to me, or do I want to wait? And I do like that you guys can uncheck that, because there's something. So going back to this thing that Hank came up with, where you have a digital signature and people can verify it, that is a PNG. And if you compress the file, the signature is no longer valid because the file changes, obviously. So that's why with you guys, that's a service that I recommend, because you have the choice. Other services, they will optimize it for you, whether you want to or not. I understand why they do that, but I like that you guys leave that up to the user, so then they can decide.
I'm a UX guy, and if basically two people ask me for it, I'll do it. It's no point in the users guide how I design things, basically. So I love feedback from people, and I'll take it on board. And why not? If people are asking for it, it's just a checkbox. At the end of the day, easy peasy, and it's done. So
it's good. It's noticeable that you front end UI guy is leading this. I mean, it shows in the product. So you brought up price of inscribing, which is important, and I think it goes back to the fundamental nature of ordinals. So as we know, Casey didn't call them NFTs; he called them digital artifacts. So we know what that means. It means it's obviously not a token, right? But there's something more to that. So at Ordinals 2023 conference, which thank you for being a speaker at Ordinals 2023.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was great.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You had some good comments there. So in my remarks, I was talking about how artifacts are nothing new. Like, we think, digital artifacts, this is new. Ordinals is a couple months old. It's like, no, artifacts go back tens of thousands of years, where humans have inscribed things. I talked about, the first real art in the caves, the cow caves in France. I talked about these stone tablets in Egypt that were one of the first kind of written records that we have that are extremely durable. I talked about the Buddhas in Afghanistan that were carved in stone. So I said, hey, people inscribe meaningful things. And over the years that has evolved. And so now we have a digital version of it. So what to you is the meaning of, digital artifacts versus NFTs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you nailed it there with those previous historical examples, right? They are artifacts, and I think that resonates more with people. And I think digital artifacts sums it up better. And also, like you say, it's not a token. There's no smart contract involved here. It's not an actual token. So I think that digital artifacts is definitely, in my mind, a better name in general for these things on Ordinals. And then there's also a different aspect of it. I think Casey might have wanted just to start from scratch and kind of not have all that baggage that came with NFTs, and we are in a bear market after all. Mm-hmm. So, there's also maybe that concerned with it as well. And I think in general, when you look at how he's designed the Ordinals theory, taking away what you're actually inscribing on these things, the actual Satoshis themselves are also special in his mind, and you've got uncommon ones, you've got rare ones, and that's the thing that really excites me about it as well. Like these are real digital gold, it's these little gems that you can find in this big sea of stuff, without even inscribing anything on top of them. They're already very special. So I really like that concept, and I think that maybe guided him in that direction down the artifact road as well, because he's a big proponent of these rare sats, he calls them, and he's made full documentation about it. And then the community itself has reacted greatly to them. So I think it all combines. Basically, there's a whole bunch of reasons maybe why he chose that, but I think it's good. It kind of separates them, and yeah, I prefer the name over NFTs as well.
Yeah, good points. You talked about different Satoshis, rare, common, etc. And that's a good point. In my remarks, I kind of said something similar where, there was an inscription on the cave walls. There was inscription in stone. There was inscription on actually a T-shirt. Adam Back, he did this famous T-shirt of a Perl script, basically encryption, because back then the U.S. government classified this encryption as like a weapon, basically, and you weren't allowed to export encryption to other countries. So Adam Back made this T-shirt that had that code on it to do that. So that was an inscription. So with Bitcoin, that's another unique thing. We think about, it's fully on chain. Oh, that's the main thing. Well, no, actually, you bring up a good point, which is you have these Satoshis, and they only have this meaning because Bitcoin is old enough. Like if Bitcoin was 2 years old, kind of who cares that you got a sat from a year ago, right? But because Bitcoin is 14 years old or so. Now Bitcoin is the only chain with enough history for these things to matter. And especially since it's pseudonymous, everyone wants to have a sat from Satoshi, right? I mean, that's my goal. I'd love to own a couple of those. So it's both the medium, it's just typical art. It's the medium and the message.
No, exactly. That's exactly right. And we actually inscribed a collection in collaboration with Emblem Vault, with an artist called Coldy. He's done great things on Ethereum. He's a great artist, great kind of visual artist, and he really loved the fact that you have to compress stuff down and you can't just mint or inscribe essentially 20 megabytes in one file. He really liked that, and he said something that resonated a lot with me on one of the Twitter spaces we did with him. He said, "Blockchain as a canvas." I thought that's a great thing, So you're taking the medium, like you say, that you've got, and you have to build your art around that, So if the cavemen only had stones around, they've got to inscribe on that, right? So that I think that really resonates, and it's building this whole ecosystem of people thinking a little bit more outside the box about what they're inscribing, both because it's more expensive to do and it's limitations and things, but you're going to end up with I think eventually a really fruitful ecosystem of really great art, compared to, not to put down any other blockchain, but you can inscribe. Sorry, mint. My brain is completely went to inscribing.
Inscribe, yeah.
But you can mint, 100,000 NFTs in Solana for I don't know, $2 or whatever. You know what I mean? It doesn't cost anything. So there's a little bit of difference there between the fact that it does cost. There's a little bit of a higher barrier, which I think will overall improve the quality of the art that's on chain, basically,
Yeah, the long-term value of it, because people are looking, okay, what kind of sat was it? What is then the actual image or text or file, whatever it is? And so now that's a double layer of the value of inscriptions. And I also like that it's sort of brought a circular economy to Bitcoin, because that's something that I've been working on for many years is trying to have a Bitcoin circular economy where people are buying and selling in Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a unit of account, and it's been a challenge. It's been a real tough challenge. But now what's cool about inscriptions is that we kind of have a very small little Bitcoin circular economy. People aren't paying for inscriptions in fiat, right? As far as I know, it's almost all Bitcoin. You can do some stuff with altcoins, but basically let's just say people are paying in Bitcoin. And so it's sort of this new value creative tool that doesn't require fiat on-ramps. It doesn't really require third parties. You really can have self-host your wallets, your nodes, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of this neat thing that popped up that adds utility to Bitcoin.
Absolutely. I mean, people now know what sats are, right? The amount of knowledge that people have gained in Bitcoin over the last 6 months has been incredible. People coming from Solana and Ethereum who didn't even look at, mempool.space, didn't understand how any of it worked, essentially. They maybe got their Bitcoins from Coinbase and had a little bit in their wallet. That's their extent of Bitcoin. Now you've got all this retail wave coming in, basically, from other chains, expecting wallets with really nice UI and 2 clicks and I've got the thing, marketplaces, tooling, everything basically that we have in other chains. And now we've got it, and the fact that we did it in 6 months has blown my mind, the level that we've got to. But yeah, the amount of education that's happened in the Bitcoin space and onboarding has been amazing. And if any hardcore Bitcoiners can't see that, then I don't know what else to do. You know what I mean? Like, this has been a great thing for Bitcoin.
Yeah, when this opposition that's come up to Ordinals, especially kind of in the beginning, really surprised me, because if you're a cypherpunk, if you are a true sort of Bitcoin OG in the sense of understanding its main value proposition, I mean, Hal Finney talked about cryptographic trading cards, right? And Nick Szabo, he wrote a great article called Shelling Out, and he talks about how people mostly use collectibles as money and how important collectibles are. So it's like, wait a minute, Bitcoin is digital money. Well, that's collectibles. That's cryptographic trading cards.
Yeah, it's totally true. I mean, it's a little bit short-sighted to not see it. I think that, first of all, they're just super passionate about it, right? Let's not take it away from them. Like, Bitcoin from the beginning has been a real strong community, and a lot of people believe it's got to change the world. It's got to be the thing that will save everything. So there's been still has a ton of passionate people in the space, and with that amount of passion comes a layer of protectiveness as well. So when big new things come in, it can be scary and like, oh, I don't want to change this and everything. To be honest as well, like the way we're doing these things is not efficient. Like it's not. I don't think any decent developer in the space can agree that this is the best way to do data on chain. Mm-hmm. But the difference in my mind is we're doing, right? We've not been arguing about it for 2 years and then doing nothing. We've came in and we've just went at it 1,000 miles an hour. But then that forces this wave of iteration and development and fine tuning and getting it better. Like, for example, there's no reason why these things have to be human readable on chain, right? We could build it in where we put it down to binary and put it on that way, right? There's no point in having human readable JSON format there, right? For example, and also like I think this is coming actually, the ability to inscribe multiple in one transaction, etc., etc. So that, like, instead of just arguing for 2 years and getting to a point where we don't do anything, the Ordinals community essentially has just went all in. And look at the positive thing that's happened in the last 6 months, and it'll just get better and better as we start to improve things and make it more efficient, and then potentially maybe offload some stuff to NL2 or see where things go. Like, the point is we're building and then fixing rather than just loads of Twitter space arguments and all this negativity that doesn't get anywhere. Look at the last 4 years; that didn't get anywhere. So
that's been I got kind of burnout on Bitcoin the last couple of years. I mean, I was just barely hanging in there especially with the social drama and just the negativity. I was barely hanging in there, and I love Stacks. It was refreshing. You have NFTs and all the cool stuff. So that was a breath of fresh air. But yeah, Ordinals. What's interesting about Ordinals is it's been sort of a Trojan horse in a way, right, into Bitcoin. And it just shows how many people care about art and community and identity versus money. Like, we all claim we love money, but what's really brought people in is this this, art and community and identity. And there's also a lot of speculation, people seeing the financial success of NFTs. It's like, well, it's going to be on Bitcoin times 10. So there's that, which is fine. But I think it shows the average person is more comfortable, like, understanding this tech from the more, like, call it creative side of life.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a ton of inbound for our launch pad on Ordinals Bot, from people diving into NFTs or digital artifacts for the first time. That maybe they're an artist and that this is now the time that they want to jump on chain for something. Or we've seen a ton of people coming from different chains like Ethereum and Solana who understand the impact that Bitcoin can have. And then they're basically doing what we did with Satoshiables, to try to get a presence there. Some collections are just dipping in and just bouncing, basically, like the Yuga Labs did with their 12-fold. They came in, made a quick $8 million, and then just bounced. You're like, well, where are they now? Like that's how not to do it, guys. If you're looking at launching something, definitely go the community route, like Ragnar said. Like that's where the real juice is. Like when you get involved in the space. We're all kind of building together here, and it's a really new thing, and we've got a lot of great opportunities. And it's Bitcoin. It's kind of the Bitcoin way. It's really exciting when you legitimately try and come and build a community. It's really kind of a rewarding. And then so the creative side is great, and I'm a creative guy. That's I love seeing that coming in space. But through Ordinals Bot, we've also been hiring as well, because we need to build out the dev team. And a lot of the devs are saying they're really excited to come back to Bitcoin. They started on Bitcoin, their blockchain development journey, essentially, and then got to the point where, well, actually, there's a lot more things, exciting things happening on other chains. They went to smart contracts on Ethereum or different chains for other reasons. And now all this is coming back to Bitcoin, and they're literally flocking back in to try and work for a company in the space or build their own thing again. Because now it's this reinvigorated sense of excitement on Bitcoin from creative and from developers as well. So it's really interesting.
Okay. Well, everyone listen up. Ordinals Bot is hiring. So if you're really talented, make sure you check them out. They have a high standard over there, but that's good. You guys are hiring. But that brings up a good point, which is Ordinals has brought in more talent into Bitcoin, because a lot of people did leave. And now they get to come back, and they're not just talent; it's talent that has a different perspective, having been on different chains and seeing what worked but didn't work. Right? They bring sort of fresh eyes to everything and say, "Well, wait a minute, why was this done this certain way? Or this is cool, this is better, or this isn't quite as good." Have you kind of seen that with these developers coming into Bitcoin?
Yeah, definitely. It's a completely different ecosystem, right? When you're talking about, there's no smart contracts and the block times are different. So just from a UX perspective, there's a lot different challenges that no one's faced before in other chains. I mean, especially the likes of Solana, you're clicking a button and then you've got the thing that, it's instantaneous. Near is also another blockchain, instantaneous transactions and everything. And to now have to make people wait 10 minutes or more on a transaction, it just opens up a whole new UX challenge, which I think that if you're a good UX designer or developer, you should be excited about, right? Because it's like you can come into this space and essentially just create the standard for how people are, waiting on transactions, confirming on Bitcoin. We did something similar. Like, we essentially invented inscription as a service. Like, that wasn't a thing before we came around. There was other minting services on other chains with smart contract functionality, but we were the first ones to automate actually dropping a file and inscribing it into the witness data of a Bitcoin transaction. Like, we did that first, and I had to build a UI for that, and it's really an interesting thing, because the UI that I threw together over the weekend has now become the kind of de facto inscription UI. If you look at other services, they all have the kind of similar fee thing, the similar drag and drop file thing, and I love it. It reminds me of the kind of Uniswap days where everyone had a Uniswap clone. Like, there was 10,000 Uniswap clones eventually, and all using the same UI. And so it's an interesting thing. And like you said, that should be the exciting thing, to come in and try and make your mark on something that's not happened before on other chains, but bring the ideas that do work as well. That's really important.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people to first inscribe something before they ever buy or do anything with Ordinals.
Yeah.
right? I just think you really truly understand what it is. You walk through the steps, you get to do something meaningful, whether it's a picture of your dog or code or whatever it is. I think when you first do that and you wait 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and you pay that fee, that kind of hurts, right? Especially if it's busy time, it really means something. And you brought up like the friction of Bitcoin versus Solana and Near being faster, cheaper, and that is kind of difficult for people, but actually it ends up kind of working out for Bitcoin because I think it makes it more meaningful and people have to be more methodical and thoughtful about what they're doing.
Oh, definitely. There's like a trifecta of like things, like when you give up something on one side, you're compromising the other side, right? So Bitcoin is the perfect blockchain in my opinion. Like the security should be number one, and all the components around it are leaning towards that security, right? The block time, the block size limit, the fact that it's lasting now 100 and something years, it all adds together into what is now Bitcoin. So we shouldn't be changing Bitcoin in any way, and we should be pushing it to its limit as much as we can and seeing where those limits are, and then have the conversation of like, right, what comes next, and what's on top of Bitcoin, and what can we build outside that, but still use Bitcoin as a security layer.
Yeah. So you brought up layers, you brought up other chains. So let's talk about, scaling in layers for a second. So, you've done stuff on Stacks, you're comfortable on Stacks, Ethereum, and, some other chains. So where do you see the opportunity for these layers, whether it's Stacks or something else, opportunities, possibilities, or not? Where do you see that going? Because this is kind of an interesting debate. Bob Bodley talks about it. Trevor Owens talks about it. He's sort of an on-chain maximalist. But where do you kind of fall on those ideas?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit both. But now, since my Ordinals journey, I would definitely be more in the camp of like, let's really try and do it on L1 if we can. Push it to the boundaries, push it to the limits, and see what's possible there. And how? Well, basically, there's a great technology that's already baked into Bitcoin called partially signed Bitcoin transactions, where with that one bit of technology, essentially, we've now got trustless swaps, we've got marketplaces, we've got a ton of other things that are being built just with that simple mechanic built on top of it, meaning that partially signed Bitcoin transaction essentially is like, I'm going to set up a transaction from my side and give it these inputs and specify these outputs, and put it out there. Anyone in the world who takes that and signs it on the other side, it'll complete and then it'll go through. So that mental model is just a marketplace, right? You're listing something and someone else is buying it. So marketplaces are down on Bitcoin L1 with 0 smart contracts. And that's just mind blowing to me, that we've got, like, you've got marketplaces of Bitcoin without smart contracts. It's like, what, So that's really changed my brain to say, right, I think there's a lot we can do on Bitcoin L1 and we should really maximize, try to push it to that limit. But like, let's not kid ourselves. It's impossible to do everything there. And then there's a serious question of like, what should be there and what shouldn't be there. It's definitely a good question to consider when you're building something. And I think that there'll be an eventual kind of like explosion of like L2s and meta protocols and being built on top, and then that'll be the narrative. But I think I'm hoping it goes through the process first of like, let's try and do it on chain. If it's not possible, if it's not meant to be there, let's then offload it to an L2. But like, really crucially, having it use the Bitcoin L1 as a main component of that L2, so that the blocks keep ticking, and everything keeps chugging along. You need to build a fee market for Bitcoin, basically, and all of these things are leading towards that goal.
I'm with you on that. I have the same philosophy of let's maximize L1 first. Let's see what can be done. That's where the people are. That's where the liquidity is. That's where the mutability really is. And once you push up against that, then let's see where you need to move. And I did this at Trajan. So Trajan is a reputation and identity app. And when Ordinals hit, I hired kind of a freelance Bitcoin developer, very talented. And I said, hey, try to recreate Trajan with Ordinals. And he's very smart. And he went through it. And he had a system that he came up with. And it was interesting, but it just couldn't do what Trajan does. It could kind of do some of it, definitely. But there were trade-offs where I said, you know what, we would get more kind of interest and such by saying we're this reputation identity system on Bitcoin layer 1. but I knew long-term it wasn't a good solution for various reasons. And so I pushed that first. I was almost going to throw everything into Ordinals. And then fortunately, like I was a little more level-headed. I did the work first, came back and said, okay. But it was good because then we realized, hey, wait a minute, right now with Stacks, we're storing, data on IPFS. And I realized, wait a minute, we can still store the data of the NFTs as an inscription. So do that part on layer one. But this other stuff, identity with BNS names, it's just not done that way on Ordinals. I mean, there's a reason why naming systems haven't been done on layer one. So I'm with you completely there, Brian, on trying to do layer one first, pushing it, and then layer twos.
Yeah, but you see that level of experimentation that you did led you to that road, and then now you've got a solution that you're integrated to. I think that experimentation is definitely the key thing there. And you mentioned something that is almost good enough. And unfortunately for us product owners, the retail market take almost good enough and then just take it to the moon. But you're like, please don't, slow down. But you've got no choice. It's through the stratosphere. And BRC20 is a perfect example of that, right? Like the minute that you read the protocol, you're like, I mean, Domo himself in the top of the doc said, these are worthless, don't do this. But the retail community didn't care, and we are where we are now. And I think it's also a great thing, right? Like, it's opened up a lot more attention in the space, and again, a lot more really interesting discussions. So, yes, it's really funny to see what things take off and what things don't, and how quickly the retail wave can just sweep things along and take them down the road, and they're not the most efficient by any means, but like it's working and it's making a lot of activity on the network. So there's a balance for sure,
That's a good point, that the best tech doesn't always win. And I did think about that. I'm like, okay, this is not the best way to do this, like for some important reasons. But I thought, well, is it good enough? I mean, at the end of the day, like users are the king. It doesn't matter what I think, but I still thought, you know what? No, it's a shortcut. And so anyways, but yeah, those are good points. And I love how overall this conversation is, you talked about all the ways that things have worked out, in the sense that whether it's experimentations, you talked about UI, it's just anarchy, yet anarchy has sort of worked. And open source software is so messy. It can be so contentious and like just break down into like, and kind of Bitcoin kind of did that, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's amazing. Long live the anarchy. Long live experimentation. let's keep it going and see how far we can take it. And there'll be many more arguments, many more really strong opinions. But that's how stuff gets better.
Yeah. Well, I want to close out this conversation. This has been very, very good, Brian. I really appreciate your time, and I think this has been really dynamic. But I want to end on my final question for you, which is: do you have any inscriptions that you would never sell or transfer? And if so, what are they and why?
Well, man, it has to be Satoshi one number 27. The one that I got way back in January there. It was, I think, literally ID 1116 or something. So sub 5K, like really, really early. That one's never going anywhere. Also because it's my PFP everywhere, and I'm really attached to it. So that's probably the one that I would never ever sell, no matter what. And then I've got a couple of other ordinal Satoshibles that I wouldn't sell. Anything else, I would sell.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah, I know, like Charlie Spears, his answer was, I think it was something, his marriage certificate, or is like a poem to his wife or something. Like, you better not sell that. You're going to be in the doghouse.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a good message. All right, well, I'll let you finish out. Where can people, like Satoshibles and you yourself, where can people find you?
Yeah, so we do a lot of our stuff on Twitter, as everyone does, So Satoshibles is go to twitter.com/Satoshibles to go on that side, and you'll get a link to our Discord. I would definitely recommend jumping in there. We're a great community of like-minded kind of people, and we have great conversations in that Discord, actually. And then from the Ordinals Bot side, a great entry point again is twitter.com/Ordinals Bot, and there you'll get a link to the website and also our Discord for support. And if you're looking to launch any collections there, or if you need help building any kind of tool that you try to figure out how to do this on Bitcoin, let us know. Even if we can't help, we'd love to hear what you're trying to build, and we can point you in the right direction. We're quite connected to a lot of people in the space as well. So even if it's not related to inscriptions and it's something else, let us just jump in. My DMs are always open, and I'll be happy to help.
Thanks. And I can testify that Brian himself and the team are very open and helpful as much as they can be. With all the stuff they're doing, they somehow manage to often respond to DMs when and if they can. But definitely, I encourage people to check out Ordinals Bot, Satoshables. Brian, once again, thanks for coming on the Ordinals Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been real fun.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please rate and review our show. Subscribe to the Ordinals Podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite app, and follow us on Twitter at the OrdPod. Drop us a line at podcast@ord.media for topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to interview. Ordinals 2024 conference is taking place in Nashville. Early bird passes are available now. Visit ord.media and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks for listening to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media.